All right. Hello and welcome to the Advance Your Wealth video and podcast series. I'm Homer Smith, host for the day today, and excited to have on a couple guests that I've known for the last couple of years that specialize in an area that we care quite a lot about for our clients, which is asset protection. So we have Shreya and Colin Lay from Lay Roots law firm. And we're going to spend really the time diving deep on this whole idea of asset protection. What does that mean? How is it different from other things like estate planning, and why it's so important, not only for individuals, but business owners to be considering asset protection as a key component of their ongoing planning. So with that, I'm just going to throw it over to the two of you, let you guys introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit how you got into this very more specialized area of law, which is asset protection, and kick us off from there. And then I'll just, look forward to diving deep on this.
Sure.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, that's Colin.
That's Shreya.
We got started in this, I think, as kind of a natural progression of being business owners ourselves in some ways. We had another business interest. There were like patents involved in that business. And we really wanted to figure out how to protect ourselves, protect our law firm business, and then also protect those patents from anything that might happen. And when we were going around and speaking to asset protection attorneys, the majority of them kind of waved us away, and they would tell us, well, come back when you have $50 million and want to spend $50,000 on a trust. And we were like, well, we hope that's where, this business is going, but we're not there yet. And we want to do things to protect ourselves now. So we started kind of focusing more and more like personal research time and figuring out all these asset protection strategies. Colin flew down to New Zealand and worked with an offshore trust company out there for like 5 or 6 weeks. Started going to all the legal conferences, about asset protection. And we kind of realized that there were a lot of other people like us who were in a wealth building stage and maybe weren't quite yet at, $50 million net worth, but were like what they had amassed was important to them. And they wanted strategies on how to protect that. And so we started building, more, I guess, strategies and products for like services around providing that to people and that advice to people.
Okay, so how would you guys, I think people, to your point, think of asset protection as I need to have a lot of stuff before I think about protecting it. So in your minds, how do you guys define asset protection?
I mean, asset protection is putting strategies in place to avoid lawsuits, to make them never happen in the first place, or to mitigate the loss, like potential losses if you do have a lawsuit, right? The idea is to give yourself leverage, because if you find yourself receiving a lawsuit, you feel very powerless. All of a sudden you realize all the things that you've been working to build could suddenly be lost, and all the power is on that other side, from whoever might be filing a lawsuit. And so having a plan in place lets you kind of turn the tables back to have this leverage to say, settle for pennies on the dollar, something like that, or just, maybe the lawsuit never happened in the first place because people didn't think it was worth it to try to, shake you down
to figure out what it is that you own, what is your house worth, all of that stuff. They may not be able to figure that out as easily because a lot of the asset protection strategies also provide our clients with more privacy. And I think, Colin brought up a good point. He's talking about, lawsuits. And I think a lot of business owners think of it as like something's going to go wrong in my business and then I'm going to get sued. But people often don't think about something as simple as a car accident. Maybe, your teenage son, daughter is just learning how to drive and gets into a car accident and someone sues them, right? And then your assets become vulnerable. Or you decide to diversify your assets, you start investing in real estate and, something happens in one of those properties. So I think it's about looking at your assets in total as an individual, as well as a business owner.
Yeah, and it's important to note that this is not planning to help people do bad things.
Right.
This is for good people who are doing good things, but the way our legal system is set up in the US, it's basically anybody can file a lawsuit for any reason. They don't have to have, I don't know, facts. Like, It's not like
they can just be mad, right? Like it can be a simple accident. You were doing the right thing, but they're just mad about it, and that's their way of lashing out, and just feeling like they deserve a certain amount or a certain compensation.
Yeah, or they see that you have assets, so those claims start to get exaggerated. That fender bender that caused $200 of damage is suddenly like, oh, actually my life is ruined. I would like a few $1 million.
Is based on an actual client story.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a few of those like that.
So in many ways, it's just to your point, it's making you as unattractive of a target as possible in some level before something happens. So it's not trying to protect you too late, obviously, but it's if you structure things correctly, you just become an unattractive target. They'll just go find somebody else to try to extort.
Or just settle for the insurance amount. Like
right.
That's a essential part of people's planning, as well as like making sure you have the proper insurance, and that's what it's for. And so they shouldn't have to come after your personal assets, and those shouldn't have to be on the table.
So this sounds like, again, to kind of our earlier part of the conversation, that, man, this is really for people who have lots of stuff and lots of things to protect. So who really is the right situation, individual or business, who should be considering asset protection strategies beyond just your normal home auto, maybe an umbrella policy? Who should go to that next stage and look at other strategies and things that you guys might work with?
I mean, for us, we work with a lot of licensed professionals and business owners. So you're looking at, we've had calls from architects, doctors, dentists, other attorneys, but then also business owners, like people who are more likely, I guess, to be in front of others and have more liability. They just historically are more likely to get sued for things. And, I suppose that it never is too early to at least educate yourself on the, pros and cons of asset protection. It can be a ladder. It can be as simple as making sure you have the right insurance at first, and then you start adding on like proper entity structuring and making sure things are in like your corporations or LLCs, and then adding on some asset protection planning. I'd say the majority of our clients they've gotten to a point in life where they feel pretty comfortable. They have some savings. They've bought, at least one property, maybe, a second one, but they're feeling like comfortable about their retirement goals and dreams. And they're like, this is what I want in my life. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to lose that, like this savings that I'm, amassing for this dream life that I'm working towards.
Well, let me ask you this. This is what I might hear a lot from clients is, I have my LLC and I'm single member, I built it, so I'm protected. What mistake are they making when they say that? What's the issue there?
I mean, so that does provide some protection. When we talk about, asset protection, you're creating barriers, to discourage lawsuits. That LLC is a barrier, but there are bigger barriers out there. Something that's important to note, that LLC is still something you own. So it's something that could be on the table for you to lose in a lawsuit. It's not, it's maybe a medium level of protection. There's other levels above that. You can get into some trust planning that.
What do you think is the misconception there? Why do people think that because I have an LLC, that either that asset inside of the LLC is protected, or that I am protected individually, especially with a single member LLC, of something that I might do through that LLC? What's the misconception because everybody thinks I have my LLC.
I think there's a couple. So one is that, we were talking about that the car accident style of lawsuit. So that's something that happens in your personal life that then you would get sued for personally, which is outside of the LLC. But then they can, in Washington state, they can go through you as a single member LLC owner and say, what all do you own? And one of those things that you own, what Colin was touching on, is that LLC. So they could potentially go into that LLC and say, well, there are these assets in here. We want those assets, and try and force you to sell those off. And so that's one misconception, is that there's the inside liability inside the LLC of something that might happen in the business, but then there's also outside liability. And even on the business side, there can be like personal claims that they attach to you that are outside of the LLC and wouldn't be covered by your business insurance because they're suing you personally as well as the owner of the LLC.
Yeah.
And so there's that, I guess, misconception, right? That the LLC is great, but it's not foolproof. It has holes. And then there's also the stuff that might happen in your personal life that wouldn't be protected by that. So I think that's one of the biggest ones.
Yeah.
The other one is that you can form the LLC, but especially if you're a single member LLC, people just do things that aren't strictly by the book all the time, right? Like maybe you accidentally use your business card or on purpose, for some personal purchases because you want it to be like deducted from like your taxes or whatever, right? Like you're trying to pile on the expenses there.
Sure.
Well, later on, someone looking at that can try and use that against you and say like, well, there's no difference between you and the business. So all your personal assets are going to be on the table as well.
That's a great point. So I've seen a number of your guys' videos. You guys do a great job of trying to make this as simple as possible. So I'm going to ask you to do that again here. So beyond the LLC, what are some of the ways that you help people protect their assets through the strategies you guys implement?
Mm-hmm. I'd say on top of the LLC, next step for a lot of people is potentially a holding company. And so having kind of business assets or investments consolidated into a holding company that's not in a different state or country. But then beyond that, is I think what Colin gets most excited about are the asset protection trusts. And so the asset protection trust can do a lot of things LLCs can't, like protecting your personal residence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the point where you get to this own nothing, control everything type thing, where there's now suddenly this distinction of I don't legally own this directly. It's in a trust, but I still have some control over and still get to benefit from the things. I'm not, giving my assets away entirely. And that kind of really bumps you up to a higher level of protection. And something you were touching on earlier is what might surprise a lot of people. We've seen people with a net worth of as low as 250,000 setting up these trusts, but on average, sitting somewhere around maybe 1 to 3 million net worth, setting up these trusts. It's not necessarily for somebody with 50 million, 20 million, 30 million.
Those
limited,
people use
not limited to those people, but obviously they do it right. But it's not the exclusive realm of a 20 to $50 million person. It might be, like you said, as low as 1 to 5 million might make sense to consider this, because it's just because you don't have the 20 million, all of that 1 to 5 you might have is still could be lost in an unfortunate event. And if
you lose $1 million in a lawsuit, that's a big loss for someone with $1 million versus someone with 20.
So when should someone get started in starting to think about some of these more, I would say, complicated strategies beyond insurance or beyond just an LLC? How soon, as someone's building their business, in particular to business owners, I think that's, a really critical area that we do a lot of work in. So when should a business owner start thinking about adding these types of and layers of protection in place?
Certainly as early as possible. These things, the longer your plan has been around, the stronger it's going to be. We unfortunately see a lot of people who wait till there's been a legal threat to come in, and then at that point your planning is not going to be as powerful. But when you're looking at a business owner, especially someone who's looking to exit in the next few years, there's actually some cool things that you could do with not just the asset protection, but also then work in some tax planning to it, so you can get some tax benefits and some asset protection benefits that can then extend for the rest of their lives after they leave that business.
Yeah, definitely anyone who is even starting to think about their exit plan, I think could really benefit from it, so that they can create that protection as early as possible. And then also, benefit from the privacy and just a lot of the planning, I think, that goes along with thinking about that, right? So once you start thinking about it, it kind of snowballs into thinking about all the other things that you need to plan for, and being prepared for that. So definitely that. I'd say alternatively, maybe someone as a business owner who is getting to a point where they feel like the business is running well, right? And they don't need to oversee the day-to-day, and they're starting to look at other maybe investment opportunities or diversifying. That might be a good opportunity to start looking at some asset protection as well.
So a lot of people might link asset protection to just estate planning. So I've done my estate plan, I have my living trust, maybe my LLC. So what's the difference between an estate plan and asset protection? And does your estate attorney handle this for you?
So we often tell people the asset protection planning is protecting those assets during your lifetime.
For your benefit.
Yeah. And then the estate plan is setting up that plan and protecting those assets after your death. Estate planning is often optimized for tax minimization and avoiding court.
But like taxes associated with your death, right? So like estate taxes or things like that.
Income tax, capital gains, all that. That's the estate planning side. Asset protection is more, it's not really tax focused. It's just focused on keeping those assets.
Yeah, like how do I protect my retirement so that I can enjoy it and have something to pass on to my loved ones in an estate plan? And so that would be the asset protection side of things.
And they will often work together. So you could have an asset protection trust that is also combined with an estate planning type goal. There's here's what to do during life and here's after, or they're working together. Like a lot of our the trusts that we set up are meant to, there's the trust for during lifetime, and then it's linked to that estate plan. It says, at my death, start following the rules of this other, the revocable living trust that I also set up. Start following those rules and get the benefits that that trust offers. So they combine.
Yeah, and usually the asset protection trust, I would say most estate planning attorneys do not also create asset protection trusts, but we as asset protection attorneys work with a lot of estate planning attorneys to add this to someone's plan.
So collaboration with probably not only their estate attorney, but it sounds like from a tax perspective, their CPA. So bringing all of the key advisors, including their wealth manager, to the table, sounds like that's usually the team that you guys might form.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So I think that's when I'm looking at a client and we're trying to help them identify, the need for asset protection, what's the simplest way to have a conversation around what might be at risk? When maybe they have some IRAs, a 401k, their home, it's maybe in their living trust, maybe it's not. What's the easiest way to quickly identify what their exposure might be?
Well, part of it will depend on where they live. Each state offers different levels of protection. And Washington, we're somewhat fortunate that, IRAs, 401k, all these retirement accounts are protected for their full amount. Move to a different state and it might only be a 401k and your IRAs are on the table. And states like Texas and Florida, your personal residence is entirely protected. But here in Washington, only 125,000 of equity is protected. Have more than that in your home, like most people do these days, especially in the last year or so. You could lose that home. So it's really taking a look at what assets you have, what protection might be available by default, by state laws, and then I saw an attorney who had a graph, basically broke it down. These are all the assets you could lose. These are the assets that are protected by default. If you are okay with losing all the other ones, does that sit well with you? And if it doesn't, then set up a plan to, add some more protection to those other assets.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great starting point. That's definitely an area that I know we need to, focus on even better with our clients. We've definitely talked about the insurance side and umbrella policies and making sure they have general liability protection in place, which is good if they, if there's an accident on their property, but it doesn't necessarily protect them if through their business they might be sued for something else. So where does that kind of end, where maybe they've looked at their situation, they've got $4 million outside of their IRAs, their 401ks, and they have a $4 million umbrella policy. Are they good?
When I was in law school, spent a summer clerking for this insurance defense law firm, essentially. And so they defended insurance companies against claims, and we would go around and try and investigate, people who are making claims for insurance and try and argue. I hated it and tried to argue why the person did not deserve to have their insurance claim paid out. And so what I like to remind people is that insurance is an essential part of your planning, but in the end, they are also a for-profit company. And so sort of like how people diversify their assets to ensure a healthy financial plan and healthy returns, we recommend thinking about diversifying your asset protection plan as well, and not solely relying on insurance. And so, that's kind of where I would stand on that. For someone who has $4 million exposed, for me personally, I feel like it would be worthwhile to explore some asset protection planning to see if that's worth it for them. Yeah.
And another way to look at things as well is some people buy too much insurance. So when we look at a risk, like in our business, you say, well, these are like the average lawsuits, the liability, we buy a policy for that. Some people will then buy 3 times that amount, or they'll just overspend way too much on insurance, but they could put the money, instead of into too much of one type of insurance, into the asset protection planning, which is more of a insurance for everything. It covers what those other policies might not cover. And one of the clients that I think of with the insurance side was someone who was driving, and they were going a couple miles over the speed limit and got in an accident. But when everything was shaken out with the insurance companies and the lawsuits, the guy was inside of a construction zone. So they're like, oh, whoa, wait, you were speeding in a construction zone, so that's actually considered this misdemeanor crime, and your insurance doesn't cover you when you commit crimes. And everyone goes a few miles over the speed limit sometimes. Right. But his policy that he had, and the auto policy, the umbrella policy, none of that covered the claim. So he was just out of pocket for everything.
Yeah, that's a great example right there of the need to look beyond just insurance in a situation that obviously there was no intent to commit a crime that came up. So I want to ask you about offshore trust, because that's people think of evasion and doing things to skirt the law. And, so walk me through why, a law-abiding citizen with good amount of wealth should consider an offshore trust, what it really is, and are we trying to get around tax law and U.S. law by forming something like that?
Well, first off, it's very frustrating for us because these offshore jurisdictions have far more regulation and like information reporting requirements than the US. The US is generally known as like this huge black hole for the rest of the world. The rest of the world always comes to the US because they don't tell anyone anything. So yes, they certainly do get that bad reputation, but it's not about hiding money from the government or avoiding taxes. It's utilizing laws that are better than the ones that we have here.
It's sort of like how many business owners will form their corporation in Delaware, right? Or Nevada. And they do that because there are favorable corporate laws and a history of, treating businesses well in those states. And so instead of doing that only with your business, people can do that with their personal assets as well, with like something like an asset protection trust. And unfortunately, within the United States, if you're looking at like another state's asset protection trust, like if you're here in Washington, there is no asset protection trust law. They don't like to honor it if you live in a non-asset protection trust state and you have like a Wyoming or North Dakota or South Dakota asset protection trust. But in contrast, if you go offshore, you're essentially doing the same thing as forming that Delaware corporation, but you're using a jurisdiction that treats Americans favorably and protects them from lawsuits, and they don't have those that reciprocity that the states have with each other, right, to protect Americans. And so it's essentially the same thing as many business owners already do when they create these like entities in different states, but it's just using a Caribbean island.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's like one of our earlier, like maybe the first question we talked about, it's all about making them an unattractive target to frivolous lawsuits. Right. Would that be like the simplest way to break down why an offshore trust done correctly makes sense? Yeah.
Because making it offshore, it essentially means it's more of a pain in the butt for the other side to figure it out, to pursue it, and they know that they have a tougher road ahead of them. And I think another misconception that a lot of people have is that then they have to open up like a bank account in Panama or in Switzerland and send all their money offshore. They don't have to do that. There are options to where they can keep their money exactly where it has been managed by the same people and still retitle these assets to be within an asset protection trust.
Great. I'm going to wrap it there. And so before we wrap, though, where can people find you if they've got asset protection questions that have come out of them watching the video today?
Sure. Well, I think there are a couple places. One, they can always go to livemorecarefree.com and book like a free initial consult, like chat with me usually. Or if they just want to learn more about asset protection, we make a lot of videos on YouTube and they can browse those as well.
Cool. And what's the easiest way for them to find that? What's your YouTube channel? Do you have a specific way for them to find you there?
It's like the Lay Roots channel.
Yeah. I think if you just search for Lay Roots on YouTube, or they're also on our website, layroots.com. You can find videos posted there as well.
Cool. All right. Well, Shreya and Colin, great having you on the show today and learning more about asset protection. I think this is an area that definitely people need to learn more about and spend more time on. So looking forward to working with you guys more here in the future. So thank you.
Thanks for having us. Good to see you.
You too.